I'm Peyton Landry, 32, and I've learned that in a family, true leverage isn't built on shared affection, it's built on quiet observation. My parents never saw me observing, they only saw my sister's screen time. The air in the private banking room on the 50th floor of the Chicago Loop was thin, expensive, and smelled like victory. Across the mahogany table, my mother smoothed her designer dress, her face glowing with the kind of self-satisfaction only a mother can find in her own extreme favoritism. The lawyer adjusted his cufflink. So, to confirm, he stated, his voice flat. The remaining shares from the Landry family trust, a value of approximately $1,200,000, will be restructured with the capital designated for the immediate purchase of a new BMW X5 for your daughter. Peyton will waive all immediate and future claim to this specific portion of the trust. My mother's smile was the kind that made my blood run cold. She likes my posts more, dear. It's only fair she gets something now. Peyton is doing so well she doesn't need this capital. My sister tried not to look smug. She failed spectacularly. Peyton, the lawyer prompted. Are you clear on these terms? I leaned back, crossing my legs. I let a small, honest smile settle on my face. A smile that wasn't bitter, wasn't brave, it was prepared. I understand perfectly, I said gently. My father quickly returned to studying the contract, avoiding my eyes. The papers were slid toward me. It felt like signing away not just the $75,000 for the car, but the entire principle of fairness in my life. I picked up the pen. My sister breathed a small gasp of disappointment when I simply signed silent. That's it. You're just going to sign, she whispered. What did you expect? I asked, gently setting the pen down. I looked straight into my mother's eyes, the smile still firmly in place. No words are needed. Money is just numbers. I want them to understand that the $75,000 car wasn't a gift of preference, it was the initial cost for a lesson, and I will ensure they receive that lesson in full. I was cut out. But I was ready to recalculate the equation. If you've ever felt the weight of unfairness, please subscribe and like this video. Watch until the end to see exactly how I used gravity to bring my family back down to earth. To truly understand that cold moment in the bank, one must appreciate that favoritism in the Landry family was not an event, it was a 2-decade-long habit. Madison, my older sister, was always the center of attention. Not because she was particularly high-achieving, but because she was high-maintenance. And crucially, she craved validation. She styled herself as an influencer on Instagram, but her account's viability relied entirely on Mom and Dad's relentless financial support, and most importantly, Mom's fervent social media affirmation. Madison lived in a shallow loop, flaunt something expensive, receive financial aid, and in return, endlessly like and share Mom's every single post, from a new dress to a bowl of homemade soup. My parents, especially Mom, valued those likes more than any 7-figure bonus or investment award I, a successful investment analyst, had ever earned. I made a high 6-figure salary. I bought my own condo in a prime Chicago neighborhood, and I never once asked them for help. That, I realized, was my fundamental flaw. 6 months prior, I was visiting my parents at their high-rise rental in the Azure Towers in downtown Chicago. This luxury apartment overlooked Lake Michigan, costing them $7,000 in rent every single month. I overheard them talking in the kitchen, a conversation that tasted like ash. They were discussing selling some long-held family shares to fund Madison's new car. We can't let Madison fall behind. She's liked every one of my posts this month, Mom whispered. What about Peyton? Dad asked, his tone reluctant. Peyton doesn't need it. She's stable. Besides, Madison says if she has the new BMW, she will have more brand partnership opportunities and drive engagement. It clicked then. My only value to them was the stability that allowed them to continue their favoritism. I was the untouched savings account, the perfect alibi for their emotional imbalance. From that moment, the plan, which I named Project Gravity, began to take shape. Gravity is indifferent to emotion. It only responds to mass and distance. I would allow them to soar on their own favoritism, and then I would introduce them to the full force of physics. Over 2 months, I worked relentlessly employing the skills that earned me my 6-figure salary. I engaged a highly shielded law firm and created a discreet limited liability company LLC named Sterling Point Acquisitions. My objective was surgical purchase the building management company that owned the Azure Towers, the very building my parents were renting. Given the high-end real estate market in Chicago, the initial capital investment for the acquisition was considerable, well over $2 million, but it was an investment in consequence. The $75,000 BMW was trivial compared to the $1,200,000 they had legally earmarked for Madison. But the car was the perfect emotional leverage. By signing the bank documents silently in Part 1, I confirmed that my parents had successfully liquidated all remaining accessible cash reserves, poured it into Madison's car and maintenance funds, and tied up the rest of their wealth in high-rent, high-risk commitments like the Azure Towers lease. That was their weakest financial link. The final paperwork arrived at my desk 2 weeks after the bank meeting. The corporate acquisition was complete. Sterling Point Acquisitions now controlled the leasing rights and management of the Azure Towers. Madison was busy posting gleeful selfies with her new car. They were flying high on their own validation. It was time to apply gravity. 2 months later, the transfer paperwork was finally and irrevocably signed. The complex transaction that moved control of the management company owning the Azure Towers to my LLC Sterling Point Acquisitions was finalized. It was a tedious bureaucratic process, exactly the kind of unglamorous detail my parents and sister would never bother to track. They were far too focused on immediate tangible rewards. Madison was obsessed with maintaining the pristine condition of her $75,000 BMW X5, posting daily updates on her luxury life in Chicago. They were so distracted by the new car that they barely noticed when Dad called, asking me to come over and help them clear out the guest room. Madison was planning to move some of her influencer equipment and wardrobe into their huge apartment to streamline content creation, since their location was superior to hers. The absurdity wasn't lost on me. They were preparing to sacrifice their living space for their daughter's shallow career, using the remaining cash reserves they should have kept for emergencies to accommodate a car that was already draining their maintenance budget. I went to their apartment, watching them meticulously organize their belongings, utterly oblivious to the quiet, invisible bomb I had planted beneath their foundation. I helped them move a few boxes, listening to Mom complain about the high cost of their new insurance policy, which she had needed after draining the savings to buy the BMW. I offered superficial sympathy, careful not to inject any real emotion. I needed to be a neutral observer until the moment of impact. Later that week, I met my boyfriend Byron Harris, an engineer who specialized in sustainable energy systems, a man who valued tangible, lasting results over fleeting social validation. I told him the acquisition was done. Byron, my voice of reason, took my hand, his expression serious. Peyton, I respect your strategy, but this is their home. Are you sure you're okay with the collateral damage? They're going to be blindsided. They had their chance to be fair, I replied, pulling my hand away. They chose validation over me, stability over responsibility. I'm not destroying their home. I'm simply enforcing the market rate for their choices. They used my financial legacy to buy a toy. I used my financial acumen to buy leverage. As I was talking to Byron, an email popped up on my phone, the confirmation I was waiting for. It was from the legal team at Sterling Point Acquisitions, confirming that the notice of non-renewal had been delivered and signed for receipt at the Azure Towers Management Office. The lease would not be extended past the next 30 days. I paused, feeling a cold rush of finality. The process was purely administrative, professional, and entirely devoid of any personal signature from me. My name was nowhere on the document. It simply stated that due to restructuring and strategic asset allocation decisions, the lease could not be renewed. They had 30 days to vacate a luxury apartment they had believed was secure. I looked at Byron. It's done? I stated the words quiet and final. The notice has been served. They chose an expensive Italian restaurant in the heart of downtown Chicago, a seemingly neutral territory perfect for their attempted facade of family harmony. They invited me 2 days after the notice of non-renewal was delivered. This dinner was their clumsy attempt to smooth things over, a transparent effort to buy back my silence after the bank meeting. Mom Janice looked radiant in a new red dress, and Dad Arthur kept adjusting his tie, looking slightly unwell. So Peyton, Mom began overly cheerful. How is work? Still chasing those boring numbers. The numbers are fascinating, I replied, cutting into my steak. Especially when they reveal structural weaknesses. It's all about risk assessment, Mom. Dad cleared his throat. We just wanted to thank you for being so understanding about Madison. You know she needs the image for her brand. He hesitated, then leaned in conspiratorially. We had to sell some of the family shares earlier than planned to ensure we had the capital for the car and for the lease deposit here at the Azure Towers. The car was important for Madison, and the apartment is important for us. It's secure. I nodded slowly, letting the lie hang there. Secure is good, Dad. But you know, even the most secure investments have expiration dates. The conversation continued with forced pleasantries, all centered around Madison's latest Instagram posts and the incredible features of the new BMW. Then, the inevitable happened. Mom's phone, which she had foolishly left face up on the white linen tablecloth, chimed with an email notification. The subject line was stark, demanding immediate attention. Mom glanced down, and the forced smile evaporated instantly. Her hands began to tremble. Arthur, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the restaurant din. What is this? This is from the Azure Management Office. Dad nervously reached for the phone. What is it, Jan? Probably just a rent reminder. No. Mom set her eyes wide with mounting panic. It says our lease will not be renewed. We have 30 days to vacate. They're calling it an administrative restructuring. Dad snatched the phone and read the email. His face went gray. 30 days. That's impossible. We signed a new 2-year agreement 6 months ago. We tied up all our liquid capital, the last of the family shares, into the lease, and Madison's car. Where are we supposed to go in Chicago with only 30 days' notice? The volume of their distress rose, drawing concerned glances from the neighboring tables. They were arguing now, throwing accusations back and forth about who insisted on selling the shares first. Their carefully constructed facade of financial stability was dissolving faster than ice on a summer day. I remained completely calm. I dabbed my mouth with a napkin and looked them both directly in the eye, my expression perfectly neutral. That's terrible, Mom. Did you call the building management? They might be able to explain the details of the administrative restructuring. Sometimes the market just applies its own set of rules regardless of emotions. They looked at me completely stunned by my lack of empathy. They were too absorbed in their own disaster to even question my strange choice of words. They desperately started scrolling through the contact list, searching for the number of the property manager, their gourmet dinner forgotten. I watched the consequences of their choices begin to consume them. Madison was the first to face the true cost of the $75,000 BMW. They had nowhere else to go. Finding another luxury apartment in downtown Chicago with only 30 days' notice and zero liquid capital was impossible. After 2 weeks of frantic, unsuccessful searching and several humiliating phone calls, where the management company Sterling Point Acquisitions politely informed them that the decision is final, Mom and Dad had to temporarily move into Madison's high-end but cramped 1-bedroom apartment. Madison, the queen of shallow luxury, suddenly had her perfect aesthetic invaded by boxes, two upset adults, and the crushing weight of reality. The atmosphere in Madison's small space quickly became toxic. Mom and Dad, used to their $7,000 apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, constantly complained about the lack of space, the noise from the street, and Madison's inability to cook anything more substantial than microwave popcorn. Madison, in turn, resented the destruction of her content creation studio. Her perfectly curated Instagram feed was replaced by stress-induced rants in her stories, though she was careful not to mention her parents' presence or the actual cause of the chaos. The tension finally boiled over predictably on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in a quarterly review meeting when my phone vibrated repeatedly on the desk. It was Madison. I ignored the first 3 calls, letting her frustration build. I picked up the 4th, stepping out into the quiet corridor. "Peyton, you need to fix this," she screamed before I could even say hello. Her voice was raw, utterly stripped of its usual influencer polish. "Mom and Dad are driving me crazy. Dad tried to reconfigure my lighting rig for better reading light. Mom just spilled coffee on my new faux fur rug. They expect me to cook and clean, while I'm trying to close a partnership with a swimwear brand." "Sounds rough, Madison," I said, my tone flat professional. "But I'm sure you can handle it. You're always the strong one, right? Don't be a cold witch. This isn't about strength, it's about money. They sold the family shares. They ruined themselves to get me this car, and now they're ruining my life. They expect me to find them a new place, but I can't afford the deposit on anything decent, especially with their credit history shot from pulling out of that lease so fast, they won't even sell the BMW to cover the rent." I paused, letting her desperation sink in. Why won't they sell the BMW? It was the source of all the capital problems, wasn't it? Because Mom says it's a symbol of their sacrifice. "A symbol," Madison practically wailed. "Peyton, you're the analyst. You know the market here. What is the value of that damned BMW really? Tell me it's making me lose my mind. I need to know the price of this disaster." I delivered the final blow, calmly ensuring every word resonated with the cold logic she despised. "It's worth $75,000, Madison. And it bought your parents 30 days in your tiny apartment before they have to face the fact that they have no savings left. The car isn't a symbol of sacrifice. It's a price tag for their misplaced priorities, and right now that price tag is costing you a hell of a lot more than just storage space." Madison drew a sharp breath on the other end, the sound of utter betrayal. "That car is worthless compared to the $7,000 a month they now need to find. It's making me lose my home." The next day, Madison summoned what she dramatically termed an emergency family intervention at a coffee shop near the Loop, knowing full well I wouldn't step foot inside her cramped apartment. She looked ragged. The stress had visibly aged her, stripping away the glow she usually projected on social media. Mom and Dad sat in silent, tense misery. The atmosphere was thick with resentment and paranoia. "Peyton, you know everything about money." Madison began skipping the usual preamble. "Who is Sterling Point Acquisitions?" I called a contact at the management office, and they said the non-renewal notice came directly from the New Ownership LLC. They wouldn't give me a name, but they confirmed the building was sold a few months ago. "Who is buying up high-end Chicago residential properties and kicking out stable long-term tenants like Mom and Dad?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, deliberately prolonging the agony. "Madison, as an investor, I can tell you that those decisions are rarely personal. They're usually just business." "It is personal." Mom wailed, her voice cracking. "We are their tenants. We pay $7,000 a month. This is some sort of corporate cruelty." I set my cup down with a quiet clink. "No, Mom, it's not cruelty. It's consequences." Madison slammed her phone onto the table, the screen lit up with a legal document search. "Don't give me that philosophical trash, Peyton. I paid a lawyer $500 to run the registration. Sterling Point Acquisitions. The LLC is registered to a trust fund that, after 2 layers of corporate shielding, lists a single principal executive." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "I know it's you, Peyton. It has to be. You're the only one who had the motive, the capital, and the means to pull off buying a multi-million-dollar property management company just to spite us." The silence that followed was absolute. Dad looked between Madison's phone and my completely impassive face, his expression slowly shifting from confusion to profound horror. Mom just stared, speechless, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "Yes," I confirmed, the single word cutting through the tension. "I did it." Madison gasped, half betrayal, half shock. Why? Why go to all this trouble to get back at us for a car, for a few likes? I met my mother's gaze, which was finally filled with the raw emotion I had longed to see. Not pity, not self-satisfaction, but sheer terror. "You don't understand, Madison. It was never about the car. It was about the principle. When you and Mom signed that waiver in Part 1, you confirmed that my entire financial legacy was less valuable than $75,000 worth of superficial validation. You taught me the value of my own self-respect." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, cold register. "This is not revenge. This is gravity. I didn't destroy your foundation. I simply removed the financial props you thought were unbreakable. You used my money to buy a temporary high. I used my own money to buy back my integrity. And now, you all get to experience the weight of the market without any safety net." I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly. "I'm done with this intervention. You needed to know the truth. Consider this our final business transaction. I suggest you focus less on Instagram and more on finding a place to live. Your 30 days are almost up." The harsh reality of the Chicago housing market quickly delivered the next blow. With no security deposit, a ticking clock, and a history of abruptly exiting a high-end lease, Mom and Dad were essentially unrentable. The few places they did find required deposits, far exceeding the meager cash reserves they had left. Madison, faced with the prospect of her parents permanently squatting in her tiny one-bedroom, finally grasped the severity of the financial equation. She sent me a short text message 2 days after the confrontation. It simply read, "Listing the car and my apartment. It's the only way." Madison, the girl who defined herself by her luxury possessions, was forced to liquidate her entire asset base, the $75,000 BMW and her own condo, which she had inherited from a distant relative, now a necessity, not an investment. She needed the cash from the sales to secure a small, modest rental apartment for herself, and more importantly, to find a low-cost, long-term rental for Mom and Dad in a less desirable neighborhood. The cost of their symbol of sacrifice was now forcing her into actual sacrifice. The emotional climax arrived a week later. It was Mom Janice who called. Her voice was thin, not with anger, but with desperation, the sound of true financial failure. "Peyton," she began, the formal tone gone, replaced by a pathetic plea. "We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Your father and I were old. We don't understand the market like you do. Please, we're facing ruin. We're looking at having to move out of Chicago entirely, maybe to a small town. We can't survive this." She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for a bailout. "We realize now how much we hurt you." Mom continued, tears audible in her voice. "We can set aside a portion of the sale from Madison's condo. We'll give it to you. We'll restructure the trust immediately, 50-50. Just, please, don't leave us completely adrift. You control the building. Just give us a few more months to find something. Please, let's talk. Let's fix this family." I listened to her entire speech, allowing her to list every single compromise she could think of, all of them financial, none of them genuinely emotional. When she finally finished, I waited a moment, ensuring she absorbed the silence. "Mom," I said, my voice steady, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. "I appreciate you calling, but the time for conversation and compromise ended the moment you and Dad signed those papers in Part 1, confirming that my worth was negligible. You taught me a lesson about boundaries. Now I'm teaching you about consequences. I won't use my financial stability to save people who chose to destroy the relationship. You destroyed the foundation. I simply enforced the building codes. I delivered the final non-negotiable sentence. I am not interested in restructuring, reconciliation, or rescue. I consider our relationship terminally expired. Focus on moving out of the Azure Towers. That is the only action I require from you. Then I gently hung up the phone. That evening, I sat on my balcony with Byron, overlooking the vast, glittering expanse of the Chicago skyline. The Azure Towers, where my parents were desperately packing, was just one tiny, inconsequential light in the enormous constellation of the city. I recounted Mom's final, desperate, financially motivated phone call. "Are you okay, Peyton?" Byron asked, holding my hand firmly. "It sounds like they're truly ruined. Does this feel like what you wanted?" I looked at him, feeling a deep, profound sense of quiet. Not satisfaction, but peace. I wanted fairness, Byron. Ruin was simply the required output of their input. They chose to stake their stability on a superficial symbol, a $75,000 car, because the emotional return Madison's likes was immediate. They failed to acknowledge that I was a reliable long-term asset worth more than $1,200,000. I explained that the moment I signed that waiver in Part 1, the relationship became a purely transactional equation. I wasn't obligated to save them from a collapse they engineered. Their inability to accept the finality of my no proved that they still viewed me as their fail-safe, not their equal. The collapse unfolded exactly as the financial model predicted. Madison successfully sold the BMW, taking a loss due to the rushed sale. She also sold her condo. The money was barely enough to secure a smaller, modest apartment for herself and pay the first 3 months' rent on a cheap, out-of-the-way rental house for Mom and Dad on the outskirts of the city. They were forced to downsize drastically, not to a nice retirement home, but to a place far beneath the lifestyle they had become accustomed to, all because of misplaced priorities and a reliance on fleeting validation. I never spoke to them again. I didn't send a forwarding address. My name remained solely on the Sterling Point acquisitions documents, a ghost of a reminder of the price of their favoritism. The severance was complete, clean, and irreversible. There was no reconciliation, no tearful apology, and no shared future. I chose my self-respect and my boundaries over the toxic cycle of their love. Looking back, the real lesson wasn't about the money or the BMW. It was about self-respect and boundaries. Many of you watching this, especially those who struggle with toxic family dynamics, feel obligated to tolerate unfairness simply because it's family. But family ties do not grant immunity from consequences. You have the right to enforce your value. You have the right to say, "The price of this relationship is too high for my self-esteem," and walk away. I have found immense liberation since then. The fake smile I wore in that bank room faded, replaced by genuine, calm confidence. I had stopped smiling the prepared smile, and that was worth more than any BMW or trust fund. Thank you so much for staying with me through the entire equation of Project Gravity. Your time and attention mean the world to me. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between boundaries and belonging, please like this video, share your thoughts on the final outcome in the comments below, and subscribe to my channel for more stories about using cold logic to deal with hot drama. I read every comment and I truly appreciate your support. Until next time, remember to always calculate your worth accurately.